Thank you very much, Senator. Senator from Illinois, Senator Simon.
Chairman, I want to join those who are putting in a word of praise for the chairman of the committee. You have done, once again, a very, very fine job. Mr. Chairman, there are three basic questions I must face. The first question, does Judge Souter meet the standards I would like to see in a Supreme Court justice? The answer is he meets some and not others. He has ability, is a legal scholar, and is not rigid in his outlook. He has at no time, however, been a leader either for civil liberties or for the less fortunate, two fundamentals for which I look. The second question, if his record does not meet these last two standards, how can he be considered? If I were to go solely by the record, my vote would be against him. His testimony is better than his record. The question I must consider is whether the shift from the record to the testimony, a period that covered a number of years, is political accommodation or growth. People will differ on their conclusions. My impression is that he is genuine, that the testimony is of a David Souter who has grown. But his testimony is not all I might hope for. For example, it showed understanding of the need for affirmative action in the field of minority rights. But unbalancing that positive testimony was the insensitive assertion that there is no discrimination in New Hampshire, more of a commentary on the distance yet to be traveled by the nominee than the status of life in any of our 50 states. On the basis of his testimony, my guess is that he will uphold Roe v. Wade, though his statements were tentative enough that I understand how reasonable people can reach opposite conclusions. His counseling of a young woman facing the problem of an abortion, his vote on the hospital board authorizing abortion, his response to Senator Specter that he could not recall a right granted by the court that had been taken away, and most of all, his reverence for precedent suggests to me that on the important issue of choice, he will vote to uphold Roe v. Wade. But in general, in the areas of civil rights and civil liberties, including choice, I wish he were more firm. And the third question, is it likely that President George Bush would nominate anyone who is stronger on civil liberties and civil rights? I wish I could answer in the affirmative, but that would ignore reality. We probably have as moderate a choice as George Bush will send to the Senate. Those who know Judge Souter best, Senator Warren Rudman, John Broderick, and Steve McAuliffe, suggest that he will be a Justice Powell on the court. With the loss of Justice William Brennan, assuming the Souter friends analyze him properly, that still shifts the court. That such a shift occurs is not to be determined solely by the Senate. That shift, knowingly or unknowingly, was made by the people of the nation when they chose George Bush for president rather than Michael Dukakis. I do not like the shift in the court, but I respect the system under which it occurs. If the Senate rejects Judge Souter, would his successor nominee be better? Judging by the list considered by President Bush, the answer is that a successor nominee would be less sensitive to the things that I consider important. I am faced then with the choice of casting a symbolic vote that would please some of my friends, or sending a signal to the President that if he shows some moderation, he can pick up votes for his nominees in the Senate. I will choose the latter course. No one of us on either side has any certainty what a Justice Souter will do. But one thing we do know, the new composition of the court will mean that the major fights for civil liberties and for those less fortunate will move more and more from the Supreme Court to Congress. Justice Brennan's departure signals that. I will vote for Judge Souter in the hope that the growth that he has shown between his written record and his testimony is only the beginning of his growth. He could surprise us all, as Supreme Court justices sometimes do, and I hope he will keep his eye on the judgment of history.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator from
David Souter to the Supreme Court. Several of my colleagues have expressed concerns about Judge Souter and the type of Supreme Court justice he would make. I also have some reservations, but on balance, I believe he will make a good justice.
Any further statements or comments? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Kennedy?
No.
Mr. Metzenbaum?
Aye.
Mr. DeConcini?
Aye.
Mr. Leahy?
Aye.
Mr. Heflin?
Aye.
Mr. Simon?
Aye.
Mr. Cole?
Aye.
Mr. Thurman?
Aye.
Mr. Hatch?
Aye.
Mr. Simpson?
Aye.
Mr. Grassley?
Aye.
Mr. Spencer?
Aye.
Mr. Humphrey?
Aye.
Mr. Biden?
Aye. The vote is 13 in favor, 1 opposed, and the nomination of David Hackett Souter will be reported to the floor of the United States Senate to be Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. Before my colleagues leave, there is one 20-second item. Our colleague from Alabama wishes to hold over certain.
Yeah, S293, S297, S1725, Senate Resolution 79, Senate Resolution.
Couple private bills. Without objection. Are there any objection to any of those 3 bills? If not, they are approved. I would also move by unanimous consent 3007. Is there any objection?
That's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, 3007 is approved. Now, finally, I would move to hold over S2313, S2756, S2650, and S2754. We'll just hold those over for 1 week. Now, without any further action on the calendar, let me suggest that we will, each senator, and I would say to my colleagues, this is such an important undertaking, the vote on the nomination of Judge Souter, that I expect most of us will have statements longer than usual in order to lay out precisely why we're voting against or for Judge Souter.
% of the way there, and we intend to be there by the end of this year.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. I mean, obviously, you can't create the structure out of the air. At this point, it sounds to me like we're not where we want to be, but I appreciate your goal of trying to get there by the end of the year. I was going to read you a section, maybe I will, maybe you responded to it already from his prepared statement. Mr. Boucher said, during our work in RTC Southwest region, we found that neither the regional office nor the 2 consolidated offices we visited had implemented plans for monitoring contractor performance. All officials at these offices told us that the broad guidance distributed by headquarters was insufficient for field application. Is that still true, or do you think it's better now?
Well, within the last several weeks, we have distributed extensively our management and disposition manuals, and there has been substantial progress made with respect to staffing those key positions in those offices. And finally, I would just make the point that a lot of the individuals now are actually involved with working assets. As those individuals, that work flips to the private sector, those same individuals will actually be supervising the work of the private sector contractors.
How this is a tough question to answer, but I want to ask it for the record anyway. Are you finding it possible to hire the people with the level of quality that you need in these jobs? That's another point that Mr. Boucher made. This is these are tough positions, and anything I'm saying to you at this moment, I hope you understand, it's not meant in criticism of you. It's really meant to express our concern and our hope that we will not be taken again as we were before. How are you, what's the talent pool out there for these jobs?
In most areas of the country, the talent pool is fairly extensive due to contractions in both the banking and thrift industry. We have found that we're able to attract basically two different types of individual. An individual who might be retired, and we have a number of case examples. We have one individual who is here with me today who had 26 years of experience in procurement for the railroad industry. He actually heads up our contracting program. Another type of individual would be the young individual who wants to work with the RTC and put that on their resume and say, I worked with the RTC for 3 or 4 years, and it was a good experience for me.
So they can go get a good job at a law firm or an accounting firm after
yes,
that.
Sir.
How about another point that Mr. Boucher made, and that is looking to other sections of the government that have had extensive contract review experience. Has any of that occurred, in trying to borrow some people from other places in the government?
Well, Senator, we have consulted extensively with other agencies of the government with respect to contracting. Our consultation has been limited more to a review of the different types of procurement systems that they have in place. In point of fact, the procurement system that we're following should be a much expedited and hopefully more extensive or expedited system than that followed by other government agencies.
So you're building on their experience. Why haven't you been able to take any people from those other agencies? Is that not feasible, as Boucher suggested?
Well, in fact, we have taken people from other agencies. Yes, sir. We've taken at least 2 individuals here at the Washington level that I know of who were with, one was with Defense, and I forget who the other individual was with, but at our field offices, I could do a survey if you're really interested in it and find out the extent of that we have gotten individuals from other sections or other agencies, but we have at the Washington level at least attracted a number of those individuals.
I appreciate that. That's not necessary. I think the main point clearly is that you're on the front lines of the most pressing contract review problem I can think of in this government today, and I think you ought to be in a position to enjoy the benefit of the experience that others have had in this government in that area, and I appreciate what you've said about it. My time's up, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kelly, in a moment I want to talk to you a few minutes about this auction that's now been canceled, but before I do that, let me ask a series of quick questions. Well, I guess you would call this the bad guy bidder list. Federal investigators have now filed about 500 lawsuits against former directors, former officers of failed banks and thrift. Now, does the RTC, do you have the capability, and do you actually do this? Are you checking out to see if any of these bidders on these RTC assets that you manage are these same people that the lawsuits have been filed against? Do you have that capability?
Mr. Chairman, we have, from a policy standpoint, have wrestled extensively with that issue, and what we have instructed our people to do is to certainly look as deeply as they need to into whether or not an individual who is connected with a particular asset has insider knowledge which would allow them to get a windfall with respect to that particular asset. But I might tell you that there's a whole school of thought out there that individuals who have caused a loss to either a bank or the fund in general, the thrift fund, should not be prohibited from buying an asset from the RTC. And frankly, I would subscribe to that view. If they come to the table with cash, our asset has been appropriately valued, it's a market value transaction, and an individual comes to the table with cash, then I would subscribe to the view that we should not turn them away. Of course, we are always subject to the direction of Congress on that issue and would react accordingly. But there is a school of thought that if you find a bad actor who has brought cash to the table and bought real estate owned, for instance, now we have a piece of real estate owned that we have identified that he has purchased from us. so that if we had a course of action or a claim, a judicial claim against that individual, we could go out and attach that real estate owned a lot easier than we could find the cash that that individual might have floating
This is
around.
a very, very difficult policy question in this area, I know that. Let me give you a couple of particular cases. A Mr. Charles Knapp purchased RCT property recently. Now, were you aware of Mr. Knapp's role in the failure of the Financial Corporation of America, which I think is going to cost the taxpayers between $1.5 and $2 billion? Now, did you check this gentleman out? Was he the cause for that property ultimately being sold by RTC, and now is he picking it up for so-called a song?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not familiar with that specific transaction. If you give me the details, I'd be
Yes,
happy
we
to
will
respond in
provide
writing.
those details. A Mr. David Greenberg is now acting as an agent, I should say, for several investors who are bidding at this moment on RTC property. He's already bought a shopping center from RTC. He's now trying to buy 3 more. And I'm wondering if the RTC had reason to know, or investigated the fact that Mr. Greenberg allegedly borrowed $44 million from failed S&Ls, is using shell companies owned by his relatives and associates. Is there a way to check this out when they come and bid on property?
Mr. Chairman, we do not have, if you're asking me if we have a centralized database where we can cross-reference these individuals when they buy properties, we are not currently doing that.
I strongly suggest you do. We've got to build some credibility, and there's a sense out there that these people who are responsible for managing some of the S&L, serving on boards, and who are self-dealing, are now coming back in and picking this property up for a song. And we've got to cross-reference this situation. And even from time to time, if you say, okay, this is a bad guy, but he's got the cash and we're going to take it, at least we need to know about it. We need to know about his past action and his past history, I think.
I would like to distinguish between an instance where an individual is buying an asset that they were associated with and an instance where they're buying a totally unrelated asset out of another institution. Certainly we have instructed our people where there's insider dealing and insider knowledge of that asset to refrain from dealing with those kinds of situations.
Let me ask you a few moments about the auction contract. Just about 2 weeks ago, Mr. Seidman, or perhaps you, Mr. Cayley, were talking about the upcoming November 15th auction. This was going to be worldwide, satellite TV, all these properties, 71 properties, and everyone was sort of getting ready to watch the auction to see how much we recoup. I was always wondering, as a matter of fact, Senator Lieberman, if we were going to recoup as much from the auction as we were going to have to pay out to the lawyers, but that's beside the point, because the auction has now been canceled. Why is it that almost one day you're high on the auction, looking forward to it, and a few days later you and Mr. Seidman canceled it? What happened?
Mr. Chairman, we had a contract with that auctioneer.
That, by the way, excuse me, the ad here is a cut-down ad from the Wall Street Journal that was a full page in the Journal. In the middle, it listed the 71 properties. Pardon me for interrupting.
We had a contract with that auctioneer. That contractor required that subsequent to an approval of a marketing and advertising budget that the contractor deposit roughly $2 million into, in essence, an escrow account to fund that budget. We were required at the same time to deposit approximately $800,000 into that account. The contractor did not deposit the $2 million as required. The RTC refused to fund its amount based on his failure to fund, and we had no choice at that point in time but to cancel or void the contract with that particular auctioneer. I certainly, we were hopeful, as I said in my testimony previously, that that auction would go forward. The legislation itself, my understanding, encourages us to explore a number of different disposition alternatives, including auctions, and we were going forth with that mandate. I don't think cancellation of this auction should be interpreted in any manner whatsoever as reflecting poorly on the auction industry at large. We continue to view auctions as a viable alternative for disposing of certain types of our assets. I think this should be viewed in terms of a contractor having promised to pay and not paying, and the RTC canceling that contract. We made a mistake, though. I would also emphasize that. We made a mistake in going forward with that contract. We should have required a performance bond from that contractor. Our policies require it. We did not do so with respect to that contract, and that was a mistake.
Had the RTC paid him any upfront money?
The RTC's total direct cost investment in that contract to date, and this is a much misunderstood subject, is zero. Certainly, if the contract had gone forward, we would have had to fund $800,000, and we have invested significant administrative internal overhead type costs in developing that auction, but we have not funded any direct costs to date.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.